Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We have an exciting session to jump through today. Lots to cover. Primary goal of our time today is answering the question of can I retire? And so excited to jump in for what we have here. I'm just pulling up here we go, and boom, and boom. Pulling up our slides here. For those who don't know, my name is Robert Clark. I am a co-founder here at Prosperitas Financial. We are a fee-based registered investment advisory firm, or an RIA. And so what that essentially means is we specialize in holistic and comprehensive financial planning. As part of that process, I've had my hand in over 670 retirement plans that we've completed here as a firm. And what I enjoy most is seeing the success stories and also the lessons that we've learned along the way of, hey, this is what works. And there's also some combinations that don't work. And so really finding um, the best way to make retirement work and a success and seeing those successful retirements play out. I am a licensed fiduciary, and what that means is that I don't just have to make sure that, a recommendation is suitable for you. I have to go a step further and make sure a recommendation is absolutely in your best interest. And so the way I do that is by building out a comprehensive financial plan for clients so that I can see all of the moving parts in one place, and then we can determine what is the absolute best recommendation for you and your specific goal. Probably even more importantly, while I love financial planning and I love building retirement plans, I am a husband and a father of two adorable boys. Cole there is the older one. He's 3 years old, and Maverick is a year and a half. He's the little guy, and they are little terrors. They keep life exciting, to say the least, and a huge reason of why I do what I do. So when a client asks me, can I retire? They're rarely thinking about, I guess the real question tends to be, is there something I'm not thinking about? Or if I make a decision like retiring, is that something that's going to hurt me down the road that I'm not aware of? And so, really, we want to think through, basically clarify, outline, simplify what retirement means. And so, a lot of the times, I see people, coming in or wanting to retire, and they're going off, hey, I have this much net worth. That means I should be okay. Or they're going off of rules of thumb, meaning like, how many times have you heard the 4% withdrawal rule? And while those can be great guides, they're not going to tell you if you have a successful retirement. And most importantly, the other piece is, a lot of people, they have a colleague that was able to successfully retire. Similar pension system, similar health benefits, maybe similar timing from they have kids who are now adults, and so expenses, liabilities are lower. But no two retirements are alike. A retirement is like your fingerprint, right? It is unique to you. And there are so many variables that can go into this. We'll go through some examples. And so all of these would be the wrong way to look at retirement. What we actually want to look at is what we call the five pillars to a successful retirement. That's one, looking at your income; two, incorporating the taxes and making a tax plan; three, looking at the investments; and then figuring out your health care for four. And last, and possibly most important, is the timing of it all. And so today we're going to walk through all of these five pillars. I'm going to try and do it as efficiently as possible. Again, this is something where it takes us usually 1 to 2 months to build out a comprehensive plan. So to condense all of this in our 30 to 45 minutes here is tough, but I'm going to do my very best to walk you through the keys that we're looking at for all five of these pillars to determine if someone can have a successful retirement. And so let's start with income. Income is first. Income is possibly most important because this really determines like the reliability or long-term success of your retirement. No matter if you pay off your house, no matter if you go live off the grid, you're going to have some expenses and you're going to have liabilities or risks to manage. And having income allows you to basically offset a lot of those risks. So what we prioritize is reliability over anything else. So looking at fixed income sources, that becomes the foundation of a successful retirement. And it's really most important, especially in those first 5 years. And I'll talk about that a little bit more on our investment pillar. But what you want to do from an income perspective is one, you want to map out all of your income sources, obviously. But two is you also want to think about, okay, um, if I'm relying on portfolio withdrawals for a certain amount of income, I need to establish at least a 24-month runway or a cash account, cash supply that allows me to pull from that cash if necessary to weather any investment storms. And so, again, we'll go more into that in the investment pillar, but that is very much falls under the income aspect as well. And I would say possibly even more important is to lock down a sound budget, a clearly defined budget. And I say feedback system here because you can have a budget, but if you don't stick to it or you don't know you're going outside your budget, your retirement is uh, not going to be the reality that you designed. And so building a feedback system, I'm a huge fan. So I have a guardrail system that I give to all of our retirees. And that basically says that, hey, quarterly, we're going to review, like this was our budget. These were our actual expenses. And this determines, hey, can we actually continue to spend more or should we pull back our expenses? And there's a risk and reward to both sides. Clients have found that they love the game of that guardrail system and they love the idea that, hey, if we have a few successful quarters of coming in under budget, we actually get to reward ourselves with a trip, a new goal, a house update, whatever the case is. And so towards the bottom here, you'll see process. These are just a couple things that I think through when, if I were designing my retirement plan or seeing if I can retire myself. And so the most important is outline every income source you're anticipating throughout retirement. That could be Social Security income, pensions, any rental income, any business income, or if you're selling your business and you're going to continue to receive distributions or a buyout for the next, 3 to 5 years, portfolio withdrawals, annuity income, and of course, your required minimum distributions at either 73 or 75. All of those become relevant. And then once you have those outlined, I want you to make a note of which ones are guaranteed and which ones depend on the stock market or bond market, the markets in general. Again, we are focusing on the first 5 years. So while, a lot of these income sources, take pensions, for example, will continue for the rest of your life, we don't necessarily need to map out the next 30 years of your pension payment. When it comes to determining if you're going to have a successful retirement, I really just want you to look at these initial 5 years. And then each year into your retirement, you're constantly going to be looking out 5 years from there. Realistically, I've just found that prevents overcomplication, and so much can change over a 5 year period. While it seems short, our tax rates can change, our legislation can change, different opportunities become available, and our lives change along the way. And so, just biting this off in 5 year increments makes the most sense. Oh boy, taxes. There's only two things guaranteed in life, death and taxes. So when it comes to taxes, so often retirees that we're sitting down with want to pay the least amount of taxes possible. The problem is they're usually looking at that from any one given tax year. Taxes are a lifetime strategy. And so we really want to look at what is the tax planning opportunity, not just this year or next year, but over the course of a 30, 40, 50-year retirement. And so, most importantly, when it comes to taxes, are those required minimum distributions. If you have a lot of your wealth in qualified accounts or retirement accounts, so that's 401ks, IRAs, 403bs, qualified annuities, you're going to be forced to take income from each of those accounts once you reach age 73 or 75, depending on the year you were born. And those RMDs, people underestimate the negative tax impact or tax consequence that'll have on their retirement. So planning those out will give you a helpful idea of where your tax planning opportunity is. The other piece is reviewing those capital gain strategies and charitable giving options. So if we do have higher income than we'd like, utilizing some of those strategies or just evaluating what might make sense, whether that's qualified charitable distributions, otherwise known as QCDs. Again, you have to be over 70 and a half to take advantage of those. You can only do about $100,000 a year, but that is a way to offset RMDs or reduce the amount of money that you have in tax deferred accounts. And then third is making sure that because your paycheck's ending doesn't mean that we don't have taxes withheld from our new income sources going forward. So we want to figure out, okay, which income sources are set to have taxes withheld. If we don't have taxes withheld on anything, then we need to establish a quarterly payment system. And so keeping up with your quarterly tax payments, that way you're avoiding penalties in the long run. So operationally here, from a tax perspective, I want you to think about a couple things. You already have all of your income sources listed out. We listed out which are guaranteed and which are market dependent. Now I want you, in a column next to those, I want you to list, okay, which ones are taxable, which ones are tax deferred, and which sources are completely tax free. This will give us a helpful gauge of your taxability, your tax brackets, again, over the next 5 years and where opportunities may exist. We also want to be mindful of when your RMDs begin. So make sure you're making a note of if they start at 73 or 75 for you. And I would consider, really the years between when you retire to the years when RMDs begin, that usually becomes a tax window. In fact, I think our next slide will highlight that for one of our clients as an example. But we really want to be intentional with those years. I cannot stress that enough. Once RMDs begin, you will never be in a lower tax bracket unless you completely liquidate your retirement accounts, which I wouldn't advise unless you have the goal of going back to work at some point. And so how do we become intentional with those lower taxable income years? What we can see here is this is looking at a client's effective tax rate. Here we had them retiring at age 67, and you can see between 67 and 73, we have this ideal, very low effective income tax rate. They went from being about 22% effective tax rate down to about 2 or 3%. So how great would it feel instead of paying 22% a year on your taxes, right? So let's see, keeping 78 cents for every dollar you make. What if instead you get to keep 97 cents for every dollar you make? That's pretty great, right? And so we want to take advantage of that for, and a lot of clients, I see this most often. We see this valley here of, late 60s to early 70s. And so we want to take advantage of it. What are we looking for? I'm going to mention Roth conversions just because if you're doing any research on retirement, you are hearing about Roth conversions. And while they're helpful, I really like to point out, we always look at Roth conversions as a potential tax strategy or tax benefit, I should say. But in my experience, Roth conversions really exist to benefit your beneficiaries. So a lot of people think, um, hey, get money into a Roth IRA so that I never have to pay taxes on those funds again. But typically that tax-free bucket that you're adding money to, the likelihood of you withdrawing from that is actually pretty slim. Again, I'm not saying you'll never withdraw from your Roth IRA. I'm just saying in our experience, when we design Roth conversions, it's for clients who will never actually need to pull money from it. Now, is it great to have? Yes. Like if you have a big purchase, let's say you and your partner want to buy a $250,000 RV and travel the country, you know, pulling that from a retirement account is not going to be a great idea because all of it is immediately taxable. And so that's why having more money in your Roth IRA can make sense. We can access the same funds there without triggering any new taxes or penalties. And so that's one thing to keep in mind. But generally, I actually like looking at numbers two, three, and four even more than doing Roth conversions. And so, what are those? One is harvesting capital gains. If I have a client with a low enough income to be in this 3 to 5% effective tax rate, I can almost guarantee we are close to these thresholds, meaning if they're filing taxes single, they might be under $50,000 a year of income, or if they're married, they'd be under $98,000 a year of income. Why I like those is that actually qualifies them for 0% long-term capital gains rates, meaning in any of their taxable accounts, like their trust accounts or their brokerage accounts, if they have shares of stock that have appreciated, we can actually sell a certain amount of those shares and take the gains at a 0% tax rate. To me, that's much more attractive than, simply doing a Roth conversion and can be more impactful from a client's retirement success. Number three, from a tax perspective, is if you're 65 and older, this is one of the first years that you have an incredible $6,000 tax deduction called the Senior Tax Benefit. It's part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And so we want to take advantage of that. But if you exceed the income threshold for that benefit, you completely lose that tax deduction. So, don't let those income guardrails change your life. But if you can stay under that $75,000 or $150,000 limit, depending on if you're single or filing married, that's a huge benefit to keep your taxes down. So we want to qualify for that if at all possible. And if you're on Medicare, being aware of those income related Medicare adjustment amounts, IRMA, is critical. So again, if you're single, that's under 109,000 of income. If you're married, filing jointly, that's under $218,000 of income. So all of those I am very mindful of. While we want to take advantage of tax windows like this, we don't want to do it to the extent that we're now giving up some of these other tax benefits or triggering a Medicare penalty that lasts several years. Third pillar, investments. This is a big one because a lot of the times I see people with portfolios that have done very well. They've been growth focused. They're tech forward, meaning they have a lot of tech stocks in that portfolio. And they assume that'll just continue ongoing, and they can average, 12 to 15% a year in growth in retirement. And while we absolutely encourage setting aside a certain portion of your funds to continue with that growth trajectory, once you reach retirement age, it becomes far more critical to start planning from an income aware basis. And so what that really means is we want to coordinate, okay, which bucket am I pulling my retirement income from? And I want that bucket designed to distribute income to me, not to be on the roller coaster ride of growth stocks. And so let's make sure that not only are we thinking about, okay, where am I, what am I invested in, but where are those investments living? Do I have my most aggressive stocks in an taxable or like a trust account? Or do I hold my most aggressive stocks in my retirement accounts, the tax deferred accounts, or the Roth IRA, the tax free accounts? Little decisions like that can impact someone's retirement and successful retirement drastically. And so, what I want you to do is think about one, if your retirement depends on taking withdrawals from your portfolio, where will those withdrawals come from if we have a down market? I like to ensure that we have at least 2 to 3 years of expenses set aside in a more conservative allocation. I'm a huge fan of the bucket strategy. The bucket strategy says, let's have a short-term bucket, so money that we may need in the first 1 to 2 years, a midterm bucket, money that we may need in the, let's say, 3 to 5 year range, and then a long-term bucket, which is really like 10 years and above. And that allows us to look from a very sensible perspective of, okay, um, this is, this short-term bucket, this is my safety net. This should have 2 to 3 years of expenses set aside in it, meaning if the market does pull back 30%, my short-term bucket doesn't have that same pullback. It's steady, it's paying my income, and yes, my longer term bucket did experience that pullback, but it doesn't matter because I'm not relying on that bucket of money to cover my income in retirement. Thinking like that is what will give you a successful retirement. I want to give you an example of this. So there's something called sequence of returns risk. And this is why the first 5 years of your retirement matter like more than anything else. Here we have a comparison of two different investors. And so both of them start with $1 million. But you can see Mike over here on the left, he's a little bit more aggressive. Because he's more aggressive, he's actually had an average annual return of 8%. And then over here on the right, we have John. John also has $1 million, but he tends to be a little bit more conservative, a little bit just more consistent. He doesn't need to hit a home run on investments. He just wants to hit base hits and hopefully win the game by being consistent. You can see because he's taking less risk, his average annual return only comes out to about 6%. But if we look at how much money they have after a 10-year retirement, you can see Mike, who was more aggressive, while he earned a higher average rate of return, he only has $818,000 in his account. Meanwhile, John over here, he has almost 1.2 million. So what's the difference? Well, this again, both are taking withdrawals from their accounts. They're taking about $50,000 a year, a 5% withdrawal rate. But you can see because Mike was more aggressive, his account actually had a 14% loss in that first year. But thankfully, he was able to start recovering, had a 7% return that second year. Again, third year, another loss, a little bit of volatility. But in those next 2 years, 2017, he knocked it out of the park. He had a 35% annual rate of return. 2018, down 25%, and then up 35, up 43, up 16. So some very healthy returns. When we compare that to John's returns of 8%, 6%, 7%, 12, hey, we finally have a double-digit return year. Then down 5%, 6, 11, down 3. You can see that while John had a lower average annual return, because he didn't have this severe losses in these first 5 years, meaning the 14% loss, and the 20% loss, because he wasn't withdrawing from his accounts in those low years. He had much just more consistent returns. That's why he's ending up with more wealth 10 years out. Even though they both started with the same, um, Mike actually had a higher average annual rate of return, and they both took the same amount of withdrawals. If I think through this in another way, and this is a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, we have two investors here, both started with $1 million. Purple investor, investor number one, had a 15% decline in the first 2 years of retirement. Investor two had that same 15% decline, but it didn't happen until year 10 and 11. Now, this models both of them taking income from their accounts, again, $50,000 a year, about 5%. And you can see because of that severe risk or drawdown in the first 2 years of retirement for investor one, his $1 million is only lasting him about 18 years. But investor two still has funds left and will probably make this stretch at least 30 years. And so that's why not relying on your more volatile portfolio for income, if we can plan a successful retirement without the volatility or without having to pull from that account that might be on that roller coaster ride, that's going to add to your successful retirement. Healthcare is a big one here. Healthcare being our fourth pillar, obviously qualifying for Medicare can be a huge benefit to simplifying this process for you. While Medicare, doesn't cover everything and still can be more expensive depending on the medications or the doctors that you need to work with. It's what we're finding, especially in California, it is far less expensive and far more comprehensive than most individual plans. And so, one of the things that prevents most of our pre-retirees from successfully retiring before age 65 is health insurance. But I have good news for you. One of the retirement case studies I'll walk through here at the end highlights a client that we had retire at, I want to say 61 and 63. And so we found a solution for them to bridge them to Medicare eligibility. So we'll talk about that. But a great target to have, being Medicare eligible really simplifies retirement for you. But that's not the only healthcare risk. You'll see on point number 3 here, or bullet point number 3, healthcare also includes long-term care. And long-term care is a real risk that we want to plan for. That doesn't necessarily mean that we need to buy a long-term care insurance plan, but we do need to have a plan if we experience long-term care expenses. And so we'll talk through that a little bit in some of those scenarios towards the end. So most important here with healthcare, one, confirm when you're eligible for Medicare at 65 and the coverage choices. We have a great Medicare resource. If you need someone, they're an independent third party that we send clients to. And I would say 10 out of 10 times, people are very happy working with them. If you're retiring before age 65, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. But if you're in California especially, there are some ways to find individual coverage without going broke in the process. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then what I stress most importantly from the healthcare perspective is don't budget based on what your healthcare expenses have been historically. I like to inflate those numbers by 10 or 20% in retirement, just again to stress your plan and give you that cushion for a successful retirement. The last thing you want is to retire and not have planned for an unexpected issue medically or hip replacement, like any of these things. Even if it's not an emergency, it could just be something as simple as something that you were planning to do all along once you retired and had more time to invest in your health. Really think about those added costs and just plan accordingly for them. So, uh, pillar five is timing. And so, what we think about when it comes to timing are planning when we're going to take Social Security, planning when we're going to take pensions, if you have them, planning different retirement dates for pension projections, and then obviously a lot of pensions have survivorship options. And so we want to look at not just what makes the most sense financially from an income standpoint, but what makes the most sense for the plan as a whole. And so, for example, some people they think I'm going to just turn on my pension as soon as I retire. That way I can carry that income source through retirement and not have to pull from my investments. That might not make the most sense in the world if you're close to a significant pension increase, so either by age or by tenure, or if if you have a lot of your wealth or your portfolio is held in qualified retirement accounts, and we actually need to do some of those tax maneuvers to get more money either into your taxable or tax-free buckets. Turning on your pension right away is going to eliminate all of those planning possibilities. And it's something that you can't go back and change afterwards. So, thinking about this intentionally is where timing matters more than anything else. It might make more sense to take those portfolio withdrawals over the first couple years of retirement before actually turning on those pension benefits down the road. And so, the way I think about this from a timing perspective is think through which decisions are irreversible, right? Which ones are locked in? So that's Social Security, can't change it once you file it, pensions, and survivorship benefits. I'm sure there's others, but those are the irreversible ones that we deal with on a regular basis. And so be very intentional about, again, do I have a tax window to take advantage of? Are there ways that I can take advantage of that lower tax window? And if not, then that simplifies a lot of our questions around timing. But typically, 9 times out of 10, I find that there's missed opportunities if we're just on that boat of, hey, I want to turn on replacement income as soon as possible and just automatically doing it as a natural protection mechanism. The other thing from a timing perspective I want to include on this slide specifically is I see a lot of clients who are charitably inclined and they give, let's say, $20,000 a year to charities of choice. The what One thing that I encourage is, especially for those amounts, $20,000 and under, is you're not getting many tax benefits. If you were to, your standard deduction, married filing jointly, is about $30,000. And so unless we're donating to charity in excess of that amount, and we have some other itemized deductions, maybe mortgage interest, property taxes, et cetera, it might make the most sense to actually bunch that charitable giving into like an every other year or every 3 years strategy, just so that you can actually get a tax benefit for making those charitable contributions. So just be mindful of that. Be more intentional with that would be my 2 cents there. All right. This is the retirement checklist is a resource that I wanted to share with all of you. This is something that I use for every single client that's retiring. And what I'll do is to everyone, let's see if I could drag this in. I was just going to try and drag it in the chat here. Perfect. So in the webinar chat, you should now see that 2026 retirement checklist PDF. This is something that I want you to have for joining us live. But as I was saying, this is something that I use for every client that's retiring. And that's saying with, every client has a comprehensive financial plan. Every client has a one-page plan that clearly outlines their recommendations. If you're a current client, you've seen this and experienced this, and I still use this retirement checklist just to make sure we have looked at every single aspect of a client's retirement. And so, what this checklist covers is income and cash flow, expenses and lifestyle, investments, some of those tax planning opportunities, healthcare, estate planning, and then obviously a summary from a final readiness check. And so, like I said, I put that in the webinar chat. And what I want you to do is go through that. That will tell you, hey, do I have missed opportunities? Are there things I haven't thought through? And really, the goal is identify 2 to 3 areas where you find out, hey, this actually needs a little bit more attention, and just work on one at a time. I think, if I haven't pulled any of these items out, again, we usually customize this for each client, but there's about 33 different line items there. So I usually score a client, and just for me personally to say, okay, do we have at least 30 out of 33 items checked off and confirmed? Or do we have, 5 to 10 things that still need a decision? Let's work on buttoning those up before we pull that retirement trigger. So I'll get back to that checklist. Again, I wanted you to have that now so that as I walk you through a couple of these case studies, you can see, hey, this is where the retirement checklist or these 5 pillars really come into play when we're planning retirement. And so I'm going to show you a couple examples of different retirement combinations and some of the most important things that came to fruition when planning retirement for these clients that hopefully is relevant to you. First example being John and Susie. John's 63, Susie was 61. Glad I got it right, back from our healthcare slide. So these were the clients that weren't eligible for Medicare yet, and that was posing a significant hurdle or speed bump to a successful retirement just with the higher individual healthcare costs. They had 2 twin daughters, both 19, and a $1.3 million portfolio. So when we looked at the 5 pillars for them, again, if we're looking at income, both had pensions, small pensions, but pensions and fixed income that they were able to turn on right away. There was also an inherited IRA here that increases their taxable income, something that they have to withdraw from every single year. And then the remaining income was going to come from their investment portfolio. Their specific expenses were about $11,000 a month. And in addition to those ongoing regular expenses, in retirement, they wanted to garden more, do some house projects. And so they wanted to set aside about $40,000 to use for some of those house updates. I think redoing the kitchen, redoing a back patio pergola, and then, like I said, some landscaping. And so those are all things that we had to take into consideration of, hey, okay, you have these many fixed expenses. If you go to retire and we're pulling out an additional $40,000 right away from your portfolio, like we really need to stress test this thing. And so that's what comes into play here. Now, the other tough part for John and Susie's successful retirement was they needed the lowest possible taxable income until both of them were eligible for Medicare, but really they had to do this for the next 4 years until Susie reached age 65 and became eligible for Medicare. So a couple different things that we did. One, we kept their fixed income as low as possible with those pensions and that inherited IRA. We took a portion of their 1.3 million and put it into a taxed advantaged account that was basically about $500,000 that wouldn't have any tax consequence as long as they didn't touch it and just let it grow and compound for the next 5 to 10 years. And then the other thing that they did is their 2 daughters were college age and they were planning to fund certain things for their daughters, but they were doing it from investments in John and Susie's name. And so an easy lever to pull was taking the amount of money that they wanted to give each daughter, gifting that to them over the next several years into a custodial account for each. And that way, the taxability of those investments, of those transactions, or any income that generates passes on to the daughter's tax rate and away from John and Susie's adjustable gross income. You can see from an investment standpoint, they needed 4,000, or we just planned on their investments producing $4,602 a month. And again, that was completely insulated from any stock market fluctuations. When I say any, within reason, right? It wasn't fixed income. We're not dealing with annuities here. We are just constructing a conservative bond allocations. Bonds can still go down. We're very, very well aware. But when we look at, hey, this short-term bucket of 1 to 3 years, getting through this initial phase of retirement, we were able to still arrive at this $4,600 a month income without needing to tap into some of those longer term funds. Healthcare, I think I mentioned here, so they needed individual healthcare plans. This is why the lowest possible taxable income was key, because it'll actually allow them to qualify for the Affordable Care Act health subsidies. And by doing this, we were able to keep their taxable income down to, I want to say it was under $70,000 a year, married filing jointly. And that took their health insurance premiums from what were supposed to be about $1,900 a month down to $500 a month. And realistically, I think it's even less than what they were than what they're currently paying on Medicare. And so that was the key lever that made their retirement work. If they still had that additional $1,400 a month of healthcare expenses, that would have bumped their expenses closer to $13,000 a month. And all of a sudden, their retirement doesn't necessarily work because, again, going back to the investments, now we're having to pull a little bit more aggressively out of that investment portfolio and either take on more risk than we'd like or risk pulling money out of a growth portfolio when the markets pull back, and going back to our sequence of returns risk, clearly not something that we want to do. And so this is why I say those 4%, rules of thumb, or just looking at your net worth from a retirement perspective, that's just one small piece. We need to coordinate this with everything: taxes, healthcare, and your investments, obviously timing and income as well. Lastly, from a timing perspective, it actually made the most sense to delay their Social Security income to full retirement age. Again, we want the lowest possible taxable income. We're going to allow those portfolio withdrawals to cover the gap of expenses right now, and that gets them eligible for Affordable Care Act subsidies. And then the other timing piece was making sure, especially with pension income, hey, if something happens to one of them, do we have the right survivorship benefits on their pensions? If we are not electing survivorship pension benefits because we want to maximize the amount of monthly pension income they're receiving, then what is our survivorship contingency plan? Where will that additional income come from if one spouse were to pass away? So make sure you're including that in your timing and risk management. Case study number 2 is, again, I wanted to bring hopefully a little bit different aspect here. Just again, retirement is as unique as your fingerprint. And so there's a lot of variables. So this would be an example that is much different than the last. You can see Mark and Angie, both eligible for Medicare as of the year that they were retiring. They had 3 children, but they're all adult children, even had some grandchildren. So no one's relying on Mark and Angie anymore. And they had a little bit more of a portfolio. So they had 3.8 million, but you'll see, and again, this is where a portfolio or net worth alone does not determine retirement success. You can see there were some speed bumps and hurdles that we had to navigate in building out their successful retirement plan. So from an income perspective, they had 1 pension, so Mark was eligible for a pension. Both are eligible for Social Security income. They had a little bit of rental income, about $3,000 a month, and then the rest was going to come from portfolio withdrawals. The expenses that we were planning for them were about $15,000 a month. And again, using a guardrail system there. So as people like to splurge, hey, if we're coming in over $15,000 a month, we need to take that overage and try and earn that back in future months' expenses. Keeps people honest, keeps retirement odds successful. But a big hurdle here was they had $25,000 in credit card balances. They didn't think too much of it, seemed rather inconsequential, and they were working to pay these down. But you'll see that that became very difficult from a retirement planning standpoint. Reason being, they're both 65 and they both have a healthy amount of fixed income with Social Security, with the rental income and pension eligibility. It was very easy for them to start triggering this $150,000 income limit or income threshold and losing that senior tax benefit. That's a $12,000 tax deduction between both of them combined. And so, again, we don't let the tax tail wag the dog. There we go. But it's something that we want to be mindful of, especially when retiring, and we want the most amount of cash flow and the lowest tax rate possible. And then again, even a second tier, let's say, hey, we have no way that we can stay under this 150,000. The next threshold that we're trying to stay under is 218,000 for those IRMA or Medicare penalties. So what was very interesting about the retirement plan for Mark and Angie is Mark wanted to start his pension right away. It was going to be about $5,000 a month of income. And again, just from being used to having a regular paycheck and knowing that they spend about $15,000 a month, he said, great. I take this pension. That eliminates us. We're not going to have to withdraw even 4% from our portfolio. We can draw much less, and that'll allow this to grow. The downside is, and again, why all of these pillars have to talk to each other. If we go down to point three, their investments. Okay, a majority of their 3.8 million was in retirement accounts. And so all of these being tax deferred, they did not have an effective way to, let's see, one, they didn't have a 24-month cash reserve. And so just from a planning standpoint, we didn't have that bucket of money that protects them from anything that any market movement, any roller coaster ride from being in the investment side. And so why that's relevant is because one of the keys is establishing that cash reserve. But if we're going to do that, and if we have to pull money out of those retirement accounts, hey, guess what? All of that becomes taxable immediately. And so we had to be very strategic with, one, how much we're able to pull each year from those retirement accounts to optimize or to get them to a safe 24-month cash reserve. We needed the 24-month cash reserve plus about $40,000 to take care of these credit card balances. Again, $40,000 at their tax rate was going to net them about $25,000 to take care of that balance. So now we're having to pull out even more. And if we do this while he has an additional $60,000 of pension income, we are clearly exceeding both of these penalty areas from a tax perspective. And so it made the most sense, once we built out their plan, it made the most sense to delay that $60,000 of pension income, use these next couple of years to establish that cash reserve, pulling out of those retirement accounts and allowing that to be a majority of their income right now. And that's by delaying that, that's also going to increase that pension 2 years out so that when he does take it 2 years later, that pension benefit has grown and will cover even more of their income, and they'll be less reliant on their portfolio at that time. Not only that, they will have cash reserves to weather any storm on top of it. And so you can start to see how all five of these pillars come to play. Do we have healthy income, especially for these first 5 years? Yes. Are we aware of the tax traps? Yes. And do we have a tax plan to take advantage of those lower income years before the pension starts? Yes. And have we positioned the investments the right way? Which investments are held in a taxable account versus tax deferred versus tax free? And then point four for them, healthcare. They're both eligible for Medicare, so that checked that box. But again, looking through the long-term care risks, at their level of wealth, they didn't necessarily need long-term care insurance. They were okay self-funding that from, again, a planning perspective. We looked at $12,000 a month in today's dollars of long-term care costs for both of them, and their plan could sustain that for about 3 years for each, and they felt that was enough. And the other thing is, we really like to, how many of our clients come to us trying to pay off their home as quickly as possible? Makes sense for higher rate mortgages. But a lot of pre-retirees just have a good amount of equity in their home in general. And so, unless they plan to move or downsize or move out of state, earmarking that home equity as a long-term care expense or vehicle can make sense. And so obviously that would be something like a reverse mortgage or a HELOC or whatever the case be. Most of the time, reverse mortgages, but using that as a tool to say, okay, if we had to pull that long-term care lever, this is a bucket of money that we could pull from and access to cover any long-term care expenses. Number five, timing. I already talked about this a bit. We're delaying Mark's pension. They're both taking Social Security income at age 67. So Mark had already started his. And we want to make sure, okay, we've planned for if both of them are alive and have a successful retirement for 30 to 40 years. But what happens if Mark passes away or the opposite, if Angie were to pass away? How does that change either of their retirements? And can we still model a successful retirement with just one earner or sole beneficiary? So all the different things that we look at, I hope that gives you some context as to why planning for all five pillars is more critical than a rule of thumb withdrawal amount going off your net worth, or what your buddy John did, and he has a house in Havasu and he lives the life and he's made it work, so therefore I can make it work too. Those are a couple examples. Here's what I would encourage you to do next. That retirement checklist that I uploaded, I want you to go through that. And if you are mapping out your retirement in the next 1 to 3 years, I want you to go through that checklist one by one, and I want you to score yourself. Then I want you to look at, okay, so obviously you're going through the checklist, you're going to mark what's confirmed, what needs decision, what's not applicable to you. Any of those things that need a decision, I don't want you to try and tackle all of them. I just want you to pick two or three. Pick two or three, try and find out, okay, what's the best strategy? How does this coordinate between all, what pillar is it in? How does it coordinate with the others? And then just go from there. Keep working on that one until it's confirmed. And then that's when you can go back and find your next victim. You can always decide if you need help. We try and put together a ton of resources on retirement. We have more coming out each month this year, and so I'm excited to share those with you. If you would like help from our team, there's a couple ways that you can lean on us. So one is a retirement readiness diagnostic, and that's a little bit more of an express or simplified version. It's do it yourself, more or less, and we can chime in where necessary or where you have questions, but that would really involve, let me see if I can actually pull this up here for a second. Go figure, I cannot. So that would be access to our financial planning tool. Again, you're not getting a comprehensive plan, but it's something that you can utilize. There we go. Let me try and pull this. Sorry, I'm my own Vanna White here, so I'm just making magic happen. I wanted to share this as an additional resource. Let's Let's see, now pull up the chat and boom. Okay, so that link that I just shared with you, that's going to allow you to utilize what I call our retirement readiness diagnostic. Again, it's going to be a little bit more do it yourself, but for all these five pillars, yes, you can do it on a spreadsheet. You'd probably have, 10 spreadsheets and five different Word documents, and then a notepad with a bunch of different sketched out notes on it. This software makes it much easier to just input those key details and then start to see everything in one place. It's the same software that we use for our comprehensive plans. It's just a little bit more of an express format. And so use that link, set up your own account, and that's completely free to you. Obviously, we build these comprehensive plans, and so that would be our retirement and tax blueprint process. We currently have a wait list for that, so we're not accepting new plans right now. We can only help so many clients each quarter. But if you wanted to go that route, if you want to be added to the wait list, you can send me an email. Or yes, if you registered for this webinar, you're getting emails from us. You can reply there. Let us know you'd like to be added to the wait list. From that, I sincerely hope this was helpful. Again, my goal was to outline some of the common pitfalls that people overlook when it comes to retirement and really identify, hey, what is most important, or what are all the variables that have to line up for you to determine if you can retire and if that's a successful retirement outlook. I very much appreciate you joining us today. If you have questions, send me an email. We're happy to be a resource for you. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.